Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy raised by Doflamingo Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video and also share this video with your friends. I have created my other videos playlist, there you can watch my all videos easily, check out as well. Let's start this video. Some would say that Doflamingo Donquixote was a cruel man. And though some would be correct, especially considering the fact that Doflamingo killed his father when he was young in front of his younger brother. But despite being cruel, he wasn't so cruel to kill a baby or a toddler. Which brings him to his current situation. The 23-year-old Doflamingo was currently staring at a wrecked ship, and in the remains, on the beach, was a 1-year-old toddler. The toddler had messy black hair and coal eyes that seemed to stare into his soul as if it was judging him. Suddenly though, the toddler reached out and giggled at him. Seconds later he found him with the toddler in his arms. Looking the toddler over and seeing that the blanket the toddler was wrapped in had a name on it, he looked at it. Sewed into the blanket was the name Monkey D. Luffy. As a former celestial dragon, he had an ingrained fear of people with D in their name, even though he was never told why to fear them. Just that they would be the end of the celestial dragons. But Doflamingo felt no fear whatsoever when he looked at the toddler. Just an odd feeling of content. That was weird for the man because he rarely felt content, years of nightmares, and anger did that to a person. Nevertheless, Doflamingo found himself walking away with the toddler to his hideout in Spider Miles. When he got there, one of his elite officers, Treble, a large man who perpetually had snot coming out his nose, looked at him funny. Hey, Doffy, what's with the toddler? Treble asked. When Treble said that, everyone else in the room looked at Doflamingo. They had never Doflamingo with a toddler, let alone holding one. Found him at the beach in the debris of a wrecked ship. Doflamingo said. Jorah, one of the officers under Treble, approached Doflamingo with a curious look on her face. What are you going to do with him, young master? She asked. I think I'll adopt him. Doflamingo said with a contemplative look on his face. Everyone was shocked at that statement. Sure, Doffy was known to recruit kids but never babies or toddlers. But the fact that he wanted to adopt someone rather than recruit them was a shock. Are you sure about that, young master? You don't know how to take care of a little toddler. Senior Pink, a man wearing a suit and an officer under Diamante's control, said. The fufu, it can't be that hard. Doflamingo said with a laugh before he asked them to go get toddler supplies. Okay, so Doflamingo was very wrong when he said it wouldn't be that hard taking care of a toddler. His first problem was the fact that the toddler ate a lot. At first Doflamingo had given the toddler the amount of food that Jorah, who had raised plenty of kids, had said kids his age ate. But even after eating that small amount, Luffy was still hungry. Thankfully though, they found out that meat filled the boy up faster. Of course, Jorah still argued that he needed more nutrients and milk, otherwise he'd be a short kid, so they tied that into his meals as well. The second problem was the fact that the little boy liked to wander a lot. Doffy would be looking elsewhere for a second and then return his attention to Luffy and find him gone. That resulted in him making a rule where if they left a room, they'd close the doors to make sure Luffy didn't wander off and get hurt. Of course, Doffy was thankful that he could distract Luffy with stories of pirates. The boy's favorite story, from his reactions, seemed to be the story of Gold D. Rogers, which made Doflamingo happy. A third problem, which only really lasted for a day, was that if Luffy was put to sleep somewhere in which Doflamingo wasn't in the room, he'd cry and scream. This resulted that same day with Doflamingo moving Luffy into his bed, seeing as the boy didn't like cribs at all. That caused him to wake up with Luffy curled up against his stomach every morning, but he didn't mind at all. Overall though, everyone liked the little boy. With his introduction to the Donquixote pirates, they noticed something with Doflamingo. The man was slowly changing, in a way that Treble didn't like. Doflamingo was becoming severely less cruel, his argument being that he didn't want his little ball of sunshine to lose the happiness that he had. Treble had spent a lot of time encouraging Doflamingo's cruel side, but he didn't say anything. This was because the one time he had, Doflamingo sent him a look that said he would hurt Treble if the man tried anything. Everyone else didn't mind it at all. In fact, people like Jorah Senior Pink and Matchvies liked it a lot, as they were naturally kind people. Of course, that didn't mean they too couldn't become ruthless against their enemies. So, thus proceeded the Donquixote pirates' new lives with baby Luffy. When Luffy turned 2, about a month later, something shocking happened. At least, in the minds of everyone but Luffy. The little boy really didn't mind either way. The event that happened was that Doflamingo's brother, Rosinante, returned. Brother? Doflamingo said. Luffy was currently sitting on his lap, playing with a crayon and a pad of paper that Auntie Jorah, as professed by the woman herself, had given him. Rosinante held up a pad of paper that read, Hey Doffy, long time no see. Doflamingo looked at him with an odd look. Can you not speak? He asked, playing with Luffy's hair, which seemed to make the boy giggle in happiness. Something happened, I lost my ability to speak. What's with the kid? Rosinante wrote on the pad of paper. Doflamingo's face lit up in a smile that Rosinante had never believed his brother was capable of. What Doffy said next would shock him as well. "This is Donquixote Luffy. Your nephew," Doflamingo said cheerfully. Luffy looked up at Doflamingo with a smile, having heard his name, before he was distracted again by his drawing. Rosinante however was quickly scribbling his answer. "Nephew? D. What?" Those were the words written on the paper. "Fufufu, he's an adopted brother. He was originally Monkey D. Luffy, and I don't mind the fact that he's a D. Doflamingo said. Monkey D. Luffy? Wasn't the hero's full name Monkey D. Garp? He remembered Sengoku recently talking about how Garp was acting depressed because he lost his grandchild. So this kid was Garp's grandson. How was he going to deal with this? Rosinante wasn't really sure. "But don't worry about him, I'm glad to have you back, Rosie," Doflamingo said with a smile. Later that night they threw a party to welcome back Rosinante. Luffy, being 2, didn't exactly understand what the party was for, but enjoyed it nevertheless. It was at the party that Luffy presented Jorah with his drawing that she awed over. It was a drawing, albeit a poor drawing, but what do you expect, he's 2, of everyone in Luffy. She proceeded to show everyone who all awed as well at it. Later that night though, Rosinante went off to make a call to Sengoku. When he made it to an alley, thankfully without tripping, he used his devil fruit ability to create a bubble of silence around him as he pulled out a Den Den mushi. He then dialed the number that would link him to Sengoku. "Yes. Sengoku here," Sengoku said. "Ah, it's Rosinante, we may have a problem." Rosinante spoke. The face of the Den Den mushi turned panicked, showing the other person's emotions at the moment. "Rosie, did Doflamingo find you out?" he asked quickly. "No, I got in fine, but Doflamingo has a son," Rosinante said. Den Den mushi's face then went confused. "Son? I don't remember any information regarding that," Sengoku said. "The boy's adopted. Doffy adopted him a year ago, having found him in a shipwreck on the beach here. That's not the problem. I believe the kid to be Garp's lost grandchild," Rosinante said. The panicked look returned to the Den Den mushi. "The kid's Monkey D. Luffy, I can't have Garp finding this out," Sengoku muttered. "What do you want me to do?" It actually seems like Doffy cares for the kid. In fact, from what I've observed and heard, his personality has changed a lot because of the kid, Rosinante said. Sengoku's curious expression was shown on the Den Den mushi. "How exactly?" he asked. "Well, apparently Doffy's lost most if not all of his cruelty. The small amount that still exists only shows if someone attempts to harm young Luffy. He's very different from how I remember him when I was younger, his smiles are genuine and kind," Rosinante said, his confusion very much evident on his face. Sengoku's facial expression changed to contemplative after hearing that. For now leave the kid with Doflamingo. I want to return the kid too, but at the time with what information Doflamingo has, the celestial dragons will throw a fit if I do anything. At least the situation's not completely hopeless if the kid seems to be having an effect on Doflamingo," Sengoku said. With a sigh, Rosinante assented to that and finished his report before hanging up. Inwardly he was complaining because technically speaking he was already failing at his mission. He was supposed to keep an eye on Doffy and make sure no kids joined him. But seeing the kind side to his brother was really nice. In fact, it seemed like Doffy was emulating their father, which Rosinante had to laugh at since the man had killed their father. With another sigh he made his way back to the hideout. It was there that he was shocked by seeing Luffy awake and staring at him, as if judging him. Luffy then turned around and went back to Doffy's room where the kid slept. Rosinante didn't notice that he had been sweating. Slowly the year passed by and Rosinante gradually eased into the daily interactions of the Donquixote pirates. During this year, Luffy learned how to at least talk decently, Jorah saying that the little master needed to be able to speak as soon as possible. Of course, nothing could wipe the smile off Doffy's face when Luffy called him Papa. It prompted everyone to throw a party just because of it. Also, in that year they acquired 3 other people, all young kids, well one of them was a baby. Dellinger, the baby, was a fighting fish-human hybrid that Jorah had found abandoned by his parents. So she decided to raise him like Doffy was raising Luffy. The other 2 were Baby 5 and Buffalo, who were in a bad situation and were rescued by Doflamingo. Baby 5 had been abandoned by her mother, which resulted in her needing to please anyone. Buffalo wouldn't speak of his situation, and neither would Doflamingo, so everyone knew it had to be bad. Of course, the first test for the 2 had been whether or not they'd get along with Luffy. To say it was a success would be like saying that Doflamingo loved pink. Baby 5 absolutely adored Luffy and would spoil him a lot. Buffalo saw Luffy as a little brother and would also spoil the little kid. So it was safe to say that both of them passed with flying colors. Though to be honest, it was hard for anybody to dislike Luffy, as the kid was seen perpetually smiling at everything and always cheerful. When Luffy was 3, on the day that Rosinante was supposed to return from a mission, something happened. It started out a normal day with Luffy waking up curled against his papa. Luffy rubbed at his eyes and slid out of bed, clutching his flamingo stuffed animal as he made his way to the dining room. It was there that Senior Pink was already setting the food on the table. "Ah, little master, I see you're awake. You're the first up, so go easy on the food, alright," the man said. Luffy nodded and sleepily climbed into his chair that sat next to his papa's chair. "Alright, Uncle Pink," Luffy said, grabbing the plate in front of him and starting to put his food on his plate. Slowly after that the other officers came into the dining room. As usual, Jorah took her spot to Luffy's left, Dellinger in her arms, and made sure that Luffy didn't eat just meat. "But Auntie Jorah, I want a lot of bacon," Luffy whines. She just chuckled as she fed a piece of meat to baby Dellinger. "You want to be big and strong like your papa, right?" she asked. Luffy eagerly nodded. He wanted to be able to defend his family just like his papa could. "Well then you have to eat more than just meat. If you don't your body won't get all the things it needs to grow," she said, the other officers nodding. With a lengthy sigh Luffy started to put some fruit on his plate and started eating it, causing Jorah to smile at him. As he was eating he was eagerly talking to Baby 5. "Uncle Rosie is coming home today," he said eagerly. Baby 5 giggled at him before speaking. "I don't get how you're so eager about it. He doesn't like kids, though he does seem to make an exception for you," she said, Buffalo nodding. "That's because I'm his nephew," Luffy said with a smile. What Baby 5 said was very much true. Rosinante seemed to hate kids, treating any kid he came across badly. But Luffy felt that it was a feint because Rosinante truly seemed to love Luffy, despite the fact he was a kid. He also felt that his Uncle Rosie's mutism was fake, but he didn't know exactly why he felt that. Sometimes he'd look at a person and feel something from them, but he couldn't explain why that was. Soon after Luffy said that his papa strolled into the room and sat down, patting Luffy on the head. "Are you excited to see your uncle today, kiddo?" he asked. "MHM," Luffy said cheerfully. About 30 minutes into his papa getting there though, a kid with white spots and wearing a weird hat came into the room with grenades strapped to his body. Everyone looked at the kid, shocked, expecting him to come here for a suicide bombing. "I want to join the Donquixote pirates," the kid said. Doflamingo raised an eyebrow at that. "Oh? Why is that? You look like a good kid, why would you want to join a group of pirates?" Doflamingo said. "I only have 3 years to live, I want to kill as many people as possible in that time period," the boy said. Well, Doflamingo had to admit he guessed that made sense. But what in the world caused that view of the world? Sure, before Luffy came into his life he shared that view of the world, but he had reasons for his. Although he still wanted the celestial dragons dead, that was definitely never going to go away. "Well, we'll see. Pull up a chair and join us," Doflamingo said. As the meal progressed they learned that the kid's name was Trafalgar Law, though Luffy couldn't pronounce the boy's last name and called him Torao, which prompted some laughter. Later, after the meal when Luffy was playing with Baby 5 and Buffalo with Law watching Rosinante came in. The man tripped before getting up, Baby 5 and Buffalo laughing at him, and then turned to Law. He then picked Law up and threw him out a window, shocking Baby 5 and Buffalo. Luffy however for some reason knew the boy was still alive, so he instead tackled his uncle to the ground. "Uncle Rosie, you're back," Luffy said with a cheer. Rosinante smiled at Luffy and ruffled his hair. He just let Luffy talk his ear off, telling him about all the things that he had missed while he was gone. Later Luffy saw that Law had returned and heard the boy vow to kill Rosinante. Luffy just shrugged it off and went to go play with his papa, as the man would surely have some free time for him. About a few days later they were having a pizza feast, and Lao Ji was explaining to Law about the blood law. "In this crew, we have a blood law, nobody attacks anyone in this with intent to kill without a good reason. If you do and don't have one then you are immediately kicked from the crew. If you attempt it after that then we'll treat you like any pirate trying to attack us," Lao Ji explained. Law just turned his gaze onto Rosinante and glared at him. A little later though Baby 5 asked Law a question. "Exactly how do you only have 3 years left to live?" she asked. Law turned his eyes on her and glared at her, causing her to whimper. The boy rolled his eyes and answered. "I have amber-lead disease," Law said. Jorah seemed to perk up at that. "I heard that it's contagious," she said, freaking out Baby 5 and Buffalo. Doflamingo rolled his eyes and scoffed at that statement. "It's not contagious at all. It's a genetic disease acquired from living in Flevence," Doflamingo said. "Flevence, Papa?" Luffy asked. Doflamingo turned to Luffy with a smile. "MHM, it's a city that exists here in North Blue. It was said to be the most beautiful city in the world and was very wealthy due to one thing it exported and mined there, amber lead," Doflamingo said. Everyone was listening eagerly now, wanting to know. Law just turned his head, already knowing the story, having lived it. They'd make a lot of things from it and all the items had a lovely pure white look to it. But mining all the amber lead had a problem. The powder was slowly poisoning the citizens. As generations went on, everyone began dying sooner and sooner, and they came up with the term amber-lead disease. Doflamingo explained. Luffy was wondering what happened to all the people. The way his papa was wording it was as if by now everyone was dead. Luffy did as much as voice this question. Well, the royal family of Flevance and the world government hid the fact that it wasn't contagious, which led to a war between it and other countries. During the war, the royal family escaped and the soldiers massacred the citizens. Which makes me question, how did you escape? Doffy asked. Law's facial expression turned dark. I hid amongst the bodies of the dead. Law said. That caused quite a few people to gag at that, but Doflamingo just raised a brow and nodded. Well, that makes sense, they wouldn't really search the dead bodies. He said. Law said that he didn't care about the past, and then said he'd have his revenge on Rosinante. Doflamingo just laughed while Baby 5 slapped Law, saying that he'd be booted from the crew. Law just glared at her, causing her to cry. A week later, when everybody but the kids and Rosinante were gone, out on a raid, Law figured he could finally enact his plan. With a knife in hand, he charged at Rosinante and stabbed him in the back, not realizing that two people were there watching. Rosinante slumped to the floor, and Buffalo gasped. Luffy just watched on. You broke the blood, Law. Buffalo shouted in a panic. Law immediately turned to them, realizing that they were there. I'll give you ice cream if you don't talk. Law said. That instantly shut up Buffalo, who was cheering about ice cream. Luffy shook his head. I don't want ice cream. But I won't tell anyways. Neither will Uncle Rosie. Luffy said. Law looked at him confusedly. Rosinante was dead, wasn't he? Law shrugged and walked off. But a few hours later he felt like they weren't going to keep their promise and began to run. However, he was caught by Jorah and Matchvise, who said Doffy wanted to see him. Inwardly, Law was panicking, thinking the two kids had told on him. When he was brought to Doflamingo, he was shocked to see Rosinante there, still alive, and Luffy sitting on Luffy's lap. What am I here for? Law asked. Doflamingo chuckled at Law's bluntness before answering. I've decided to make you a full member of our family. Doflamingo said. A full member? What? So, neither boys nor the man he had stabbed had ratted him out. That really confused him, since he was rather used to people only caring for themselves. And speaking of ratting out, the 3-year-old was right, but how did he know? I mean, sure, Rosinante practically doted on Luffy, despite the boy being the thing the man hated. But how could the 3-year-old know what the man was thinking? Anyways, Law's thoughts returned to the offer presented by Doflamingo. You know I'm going to die in 3 years, right? He asked. Luffy giggled at that. He knew why his papa was taking this chance. Papa deals in the underworld. Though, it's mostly in the trade of devil fruits, is that right, Papa? Luffy asked, looking at Doffy. Doflamingo chuckled again before ruffling his son's hair. Yup, little one. I'm pretty sure we can find a devil fruit that can cure your illness. Doflamingo said. Law had a disbelieving look on his face. Really? He asked. Yeah, really. If you manage to find one before you die, I'll train you to be my right hand. The holder of the Corazon seat. Doflamingo said. Law was really interested in the offer. If he could find a cure for his illness, he'd gladly accept the offer. Doflamingo then noticed the wound on Rosinante. What happened, brother? Did someone attack you? Doffy asked, concerned. Rosinante just waved it off with a smile before writing something. An enemy attacked me, I took care of it. Rosinante wrote. Doflamingo nodded at that before speaking. Alright, that's good. Just make sure you have senior pink look at it later. We don't want it to get infected. Doflamingo said. Rosinante nodded at Doflamingo before Doflamingo laughed. I swear though, brother, Senior Pink seems to get most of his doctor training from you. You get injured too much, from getting stabbed to burning yourself because of your clumsiness. Doflamingo laughed. Rosinante blushed at that before writing something. It's not my fault I'm clumsy. Rosinante wrote. Soon though the meeting dispersed and they went to the dining room where dinner was starting. There Doflamingo announced Law's entrance into their family, which caused everyone to cheer. A little bit later, Law pulled Luffy off to the side to ask him a question. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, not understanding how the 3-year-old was lacking selfishness. Luffy just smiled and giggled. I can tell you're sad and angry on the inside. I don't want to see that. I want to see Tora happy. Luffy said. Well, Law was stunned at that response, to say the least. He was surprised even more when Luffy hugged him, prompting a warm feeling to run through Law. It felt just like when he was with his family, when he was taking care of his little sister. With a smile, Law had one thought that was running through his mind. Maybe I will find a family with these guys. He thought as he hugged Luffy back. So began Law's entrance into the Donquixote pirates. Law would start getting trained by the other elite officers, and of course, Luffy would watch. Since it was Luffy, the elite officers allowed it, as they couldn't really say no to him. Law really wanted to know why Luffy was watching him train. Luffy's response was that it was cool, and he really wanted to train too. Why don't you, Luffy? he asked. Luffy pouted at that. Appa says he won't start my training until I'm 6 or 8. Says I'm too young to start the hard training that everyone goes under. Luffy whined. Law raised a brow at that. You know Doflamingo you is right about that. This training is really hard, I don't think you'd be able to handle it for long. Law said. But I'm totally strong. My punches are as strong as a pistol. Luffy said. Law chuckled at that, ruffling Luffy's hair. The pistol, eh? Even so, you need to wait. Your papa just doesn't want you to get hurt. Law said. Luffy just sighed as Law was told his break was over by Diamante. Sure, he understood his papa's concern, but he wanted to get stronger. Luffy wandered off to find his Uncle Rosie, maybe he'd listen to him. Soon enough Luffy found his uncle sitting at the desk dealing with paperwork. His uncle had been recently promoted to Corazon as his uncle Virgo had gone undercover in the Marines. So he seemed to have accrued a lot of paperwork. Uncle Rosie, can you train me? Luffy asked the man. Rosinante looked at him before writing something and showing the kid. Do you know what your papa has said about this? Rosinante wrote. Luffy pouted at this. Please. Luffy whined. Rosinante seemed to make a soundless eye before nodding. Fine, I'll teach you one thing, something that your papa won't get mad at me for. Rosinante wrote, causing Luffy to cheer. Rosinante stood up and led Luffy to an empty training room where he instructed Luffy to sit on the floor. I'm going to teach you something called observation haki or Kenbenshoku haki. Corazon wrote. Haki? What's that? Luffy asked curiously, never had really heard the term before. Well, actually that was a lie, he had heard it briefly mentioned when he was watching one of Toronto's training sessions. But other than that, he'd never heard of it before. Rosinante decided to write up an explanation. Haki is basically a person's will. There are 3 kinds, Kenbenshoku haki, Gyuzushoku haki or armament haki, and Hashoku haki or conqueror's haki. Rosinante explained in writing. Luffy suddenly gained an odd look and was really excited. Ooh. What do each of them do? Luffy asked eagerly. Rosinante soundlessly chuckled at that before writing. Kenbenshoku haki lets you sense your surroundings and avoid attacks. Gyuzushoku haki lets you coat your arm in it to enhance your attacks, damage devil fruit users, and endure attacks. And lastly Hashoku haki lets you enforce your will on others. Only 1 in a million have Hashoku haki, but your papa's one of them. Rosinante wrote. Rosinante patiently waited as Luffy gushed about how cool his papa was and how he was hoping that he'd have it too. Of course, the boy's reason was that he wanted to share something with his papa. Rosinante found it a bit sweet. He however then got Luffy's attention back by writing something. Are you ready to start your Kenbenshoku haki training? Rosinante asked in writing. Luffy nodded eagerly, reading to start. First Rosinante wrote that he would be throwing pebbles at Luffy and that Luffy's job would be to dodge them. Then Rosinante instructed Luffy to stand up as he blindfolded the boy, as this training would be pointless if Luffy could still see. Rosinante then chucked the pebble at Luffy and was utterly surprised to see the boy immediately dodge. He continued this, throwing all the pebbles he had one by one at the boy. Surprisingly Luffy could dodge all of them. Rosinante then quickly took off Luffy's blindfold and wrote a question on his pad of paper. How long have you been able to do this? Rosinante wrote. For as long as I can remember. I don't know if this counts too, but I keep feeling things that aren't mine. Luffy said. Well, color Rosinante surprised. He then asked Luffy to follow him. He led the boy to Doffy who was working in his office, looking over their finances. Doflamingo saw them come in and looked at them with curiosity in his eyes. Doffy, Luffy here is a natural Kenbenshoku haki user. In fact, it's way beyond natural. Rosinante wrote, causing Doffy to raise a brow. Oh? What do you mean by that? He asked, intrigued. Rosinante then turned to Luffy and began to write. Luffy, how many people are in this port town? Rosinante wrote. Luffy's face scrunched up in confusion. I don't know, there's too many to count, but not as much as the entire island. Luffy whined. Well, that surprised Doflamingo. Being able to know how many people were on an island was out of the realm of normal observation haki. Sure, you could tell the strength of people, but if they were weaker than you then it required too much effort to focus on them. Rosinante then wrote something else. What is your papa feeling right now? Focus on him specifically. Rosinante wrote. Luffy's eyes scrunched up in focus before he spoke. Curiosity. Happiness. Something really warm and nice. Luffy said. Okay, now Doflamingo was shocked. Sensing emotions was impossible for normal observation haki users. In fact, only a few people in history have been reported to be able to sense emotions. One of them, he had heard on the grapevine, was Queen Atohim of Fishman Island. He picked up Luffy and cuddled him. Aren't you a special little boy? He said, smiling at his son's giggles. The year went by slowly with Luffy watching Law train and Luffy also training his reflexes so he could avoid attacks easier. Of course, they had also moved hideouts that year to one closer to the red line. In that year, his papa had also managed to find 2 devil fruits that 2 of the kids, Buffalo and Baby 5, wanted. Buffalo had wanted the Guru Guru no Mi, a fruit that allowed one to turn any part of their body or clothing into propellers. Baby 5 wanted the Buki Buki no Mi, a fruit that allowed one to turn any of their body parts into weapons. With those 2 eating fruits, Luffy decided to start reading the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia to search for a devil fruit he wanted and maybe for one that would heal Law. In fact, it was by the 2nd year that Luffy had actually found both of them. He approached his papa while he was working. "Yes, little one?" he asked, putting down his pen. "Papa? I've decided what fruit I want," Luffy said eagerly, holding the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia in his hands. Doflamingo raised a brow at that. He didn't know his son had been wanting a devil fruit. It was a serious decision as you could no longer swim once you ate it. Of course, there were ways around it, like training really hard in water to where you could swim but still not use your powers. Jorah was a prime example of that as she could still swim and enjoyed the action. "Oh, and what is it?" he asked. Luffy flipped the pages and turned the book to show his papa. On the page was a painting of a bright yellow fruit that seemed to glitter. Emblazoned above the fruit were the words Pika Pika no Mi, the light fruit of Loja class. That prompted Doflamingo to raise his brow again. "Light? That was an odd request. Why light, son?" he asked. "Because it's cool. I could go as fast as the speed of light." "Zoom," Luffy said, adding a sound effect at the end, causing Doflamingo to laugh. Well, if his son wanted it then he'll try his best to get it. Though there'd be a slight problem with it. If the underworld rumors were correct, the Marines were also looking for the Pika Pika no Mi for one of their up-and-coming vice admirals, Vice Admiral Borsellino. But then again it would hardly be fun if it was easy, eh? However, he saw that his son was still standing there with a book in hand. "What else do you need, Lu?" his papa asked. I might have a way to cure Torao," Luffy said quietly. Okay, that caught his attention big time. He had been searching for a cure as well but was having no luck. Of course, he was looking through the medical way first before going to Devil Fruit. He didn't want to give the kids ability to swim away if there was a cure that didn't require a fruit. "What is it?" he asked. Luffy then began opening the book again and turned the pages before revealing a fruit that had Doflamingo freeze for a second. Painted on the page was a small red, heart-shaped strawberry-like fruit. Emblazoned across the top, just like the Pika Pika no Mi's page, were the words Op Op no Mi, the operation fruit of type Paramecia. To be honest, before he had taken in Luffy he had thought about the Op Op no Mi. One of the pieces of information he knew about the fruit was that the eater was capable of giving someone eternal youth at the cost of their life. He voiced as much to his son. "Papa, eternal youth would be pointless. If I was forever young I'd watch as you and everyone else I love die," Luffy said. That paused Doflamingo. His son was right, immortality would mean that he'd see his son die before his eyes. So, he guessed immortality was out of the question. He'd have to use the information he had gotten from the celestial dragons to blackmail them instead. Maybe he could see about taking back his family's kingdom. Hopefully the king wouldn't mind. From what he heard, neither of King Riku's children wanted to take over. Anyways, he turned his attention to Luffy who started speaking again. "I figured Torao could use it to cure himself. He knows a lot of medical stuff so he'd be able to use it perfectly," Luffy said. His son had a point there. Out of everybody, Law had the best medical knowledge despite his age. Though, Law had explained that it was because his parents were doctors and they were training him to be one too. The Op Op no Mi was a fruit that functioned on a person's medical knowledge. If somebody had no such knowledge, the fruit would be outright useless. So, Doflamingo agreed to keep an eye out for the fruit. Later during a meeting, he let his officers know he was keeping an eye out for those 2 fruits for the kids. About a few months later, Luffy was hanging out with Baby 5, Buffalo, and Law when Baby 5 said something. "Their white spots are getting more prominent," she said. Law shrugged, not really caring about it. "Well, I do only have a year to live," Law said. Baby 5 seemed to think about something before speaking. "Hey, we told you our names earlier, you should tell us your full name," she said. Luffy looked at Law with pleading eyes, causing the older boy to sigh and relent. "My full name's Trafalgar Law," he said. Baby 5 oohed at that before speaking. "You're a D just like a little master. Does that mean you're related?" she said eagerly. Luffy pouted at Baby 5 and began to whine at her. "Baby. I told you not to call me little master. It's so stuffy," he whined, causing Buffalo to chuckle. Law just rolled his eyes before talking. "The D is supposed to be secret and Water's my true name. So I don't really know if I'm related to Luya," Law said. Suddenly Law was grabbed by Rosinante who ran off with him. Curious, Luffy decided to follow them. It was when he reached them that he surprisingly finally heard Rosinante's voice. "Are you really a D, is that your true name?" Rosinante asked. Law? Can you talk? And of course it's my true name. Law said. Luffy however walked forward and spoke in awe. I knew it. Uncle Rosie can talk. Luffy said cheerfully. Rosinante was shocked that Luffy followed them and was even more shocked that the boy had an inkling that he could talk. You had a feeling that I could talk? He asked curiously. Luffy nodded cheerfully. Something about you felt off, not bad, but off. It was similar to Papa and everyone else who has a devil fruit. Luffy said, jumping onto Law's back. What are you doing, Luya? Law asked. Piggyback ride. Luffy said cheerfully. Law rolled his eyes and acquiesced, letting the boy ride on his shoulders. Boy was he lucky that the little guy wasn't that heavy. Rosinante returned his conversation to the earlier topic. If you're truly a D then you mustn't tell Doffy about it. Rosinante said. Luffy shook his head at that. Appa wouldn't mind at all. I mean he told me that I'm adopted but the D's truly a part of my name. Luffy said eagerly. Adopted? Law asked, not really having known that. Luffy nodded. Appa adopted me when I was a baby. He said he found me in a shipwreck and felt the need to take me in. But I don't care, Papa's my papa. Luffy said happily. Rosinante smiled at that. Well, he was still obligated to spy for the Marines, he wouldn't truly turn against his brother unless the man did anything bad. Why was he mentioning this? Well, the little child in front of him was responsible for this attitude, for his brother finally inheriting their father's kindness. Well, you two can't tell Doffy that I can speak. Rosinante said. Luffy gave him a curious look, Law answering the question that Luffy had on his mind. Why are you faking mutism then? Law asked. Because I want to hide the fact that I'm a devil fruit user. Rosinante said. Luffy could tell that it was a half lie, but let it go. He instead asked something else. What's your fruit, uncle? Luffy asked eagerly. Rosinante snapped his fingers and suddenly all the noise around them stopped and it was complete silence. I ate Nagi Nagi no Mi. I am a soundless human. Rosinante said. Luffy looked on in awe, but Law just looked at the man as if he was lame. Their ability is lame and useless. Law said, voicing his thoughts. Luffy shook his head vehemently at that. Nua? That means that uncle can sneak anywhere he wants. He could be an assassin. Luffy shouted. Law thought about that and admitted that Luffy had a point. By soundproofing his movements, Rosinante could sneak practically anywhere without anyone knowing. Okay, so it's not that useless. But it's still lame. Law said. Rosinante just face-faulted, somehow catching his feather mantle on fire through that action. Luffy just giggled and pulled a water skin pouch off his hip and tossed the water at his uncle. Uncle, you're so clumsy. Luffy said. Law laughed with Luffy at the man's wet dog look. After about 30 minutes of the man showing off his powers they returned to the hideout. A week later Rosinante told Doflamingo that he was taking Law on a trip to find a cure for his illness. Luffy asked to join and Doffy reluctantly let him go. The trip lasted over 6 months, and in those 6 months, Law, Luffy, and Rosinante grew closer. Law had taken to calling Rosinante Kora-san, which was a big improvement in Rosinante's eyes. However, in those 6 months they had zero success. Each and every hospital that they went to turned them away and kicked them out in spite, believing that Law's disease was contagious. Each time they would be kicked out Rosinante would just smile and Law and say maybe the next one will help. As the months went by though, Luffy saw that Law was getting worse and worse. By month 5, most of Law's body was covered in white spots and he was starting to stay awake for less and less time. Of course, Luffy got his revenge on all the doctors that turned them away, managing to convince his uncle into using his abilities to help him prank the doctors. Of course, Rosinante may have helped because every time Law saw the pranks he'd smile. The two did everything to see Law smile and laugh, despite the hacking coughs and fervent fevers, because if he laughed and smiled then they knew he was still going to live. When it did get to the 6th month, the three had gotten a call from Luffy's papa. The man sounded excited and happy on the other end of the phone. Hey. You three. I have a surprise for you that'll bring Law's spirits up. Doflamingo said. Grabbing the Den Den Mushi, Luffy answered eagerly. What is it, papa? Luffy asked. The Den Den Mushi gained an excited smile. I found it, Lu. I found the devil fruit that Law can cure himself with. Doflamingo said. That statement shocked the two boys and Rosinante. Instantly Law grabbed the Den Den Mushi and spoke. What's the devil fruit? He asked, his voice filled with hope. It's the Ope no Mi. Lu convinced me to search for it for you, and a group of pirates are selling it. Doflamingo said. Law's confused face probably showed on the other Den Den Mushi because Doflamingo explained a second later. The Ope no Mi lets you complete surgeries and operations that normal doctors can dream about. With it you can perform surgery on yourself and cure your disease. Doflamingo said. Law instantly gained a happy smile from that, but Luffy grabbed the Den Den Mushi from him to ask a question. Are you going to buy it, papa? Luffy asked. The Den Mushi rolled its eyes before Doflamingo's voice came out. Not at all, son, we're pirates after all. We'll steal it. Plus, the pirates want 5 billion belly for it. We don't have that kind of money. Doflamingo said. The three people on the boat winced. Doflamingo was right, they didn't have that kind of money. By now it seemed like Law and Luffy were playing hot potato with the Den Mushi because Law grabbed it next. What do you want us to do? Law asked. As much as I want you guys to stay away, you probably don't have that much time. So, Rosie, I want you guys to get here as soon as possible. If you get here early then try to steal the fruit. But if it's too dangerous don't do anything. I don't want Lure Law getting hurt. Doflamingo said. Rosinante nodded, causing Luffy to relay that to his papa. Law however pouted at the Den Mushi. Why can't I do anything? I'm strong. Law whined, mimicking Luffy from a few days ago when they left him to steal food. Doflamingo's chuckle came through the Den Mushi before he replied. Law, you're a sick boy who's literally on death's doorstep. I don't think you can do much right now. Doflamingo said. Law sighed before agreeing. They discussed backup plans in case something happened before ending the call. Rosinante then gave the two boys a smile before speaking. Well, I guess we're heading to Minion Island. Rosinante said. A few days into their travel, Law started really succumbing to his illness. That had Rosinante in a panic as he tried to make the boat go faster. Come on Law, stay alive for 3 more weeks. Rosinante worried. Luffy wasn't panicking at all, he just smiled at Law with a happy smile. Don't worry Uncle Rosie, Tora won't die, he's too strong for that. Luffy said. Rosinante just laughed and smiled at Luffy. I wish I had your optimism, Lou. Rosinante said. When they were a day away from the island they were hit by a typhoon. Thankfully with Luffy's help they made it safely through the typhoon and landed on Minion Island. It was there that Rosinante led them into the abandoned village and hid the two of them by a building, telling them to stay there. Law, worried for Corazon, asked Luffy a question. Luya, can you narrate what happens? Law asked, knowing of Luffy's high level of Kenbenshoku haki. Luffy nodding cheerfully, able to do so because his Uncle Rosie left them in a soundproof bubble. He then focused on Rosinante's signature and began talking to Law. He's running up to the place where all the pirates are and he tripped. Luffy said before giggling. Law laughed with Luffy, the laughter easing some of his anxiety. Ew. He just entered the pirate hideout and nobody's reacting to him, telling you his powers are cool. Luffy said. Law just smiled at Luffy and nodded. If this succeeded, he vowed to never call Coruscant's powers lame and useless ever again. Luffy then picked up the narration again. He seems to have stopped somewhere. I think he's picking up the devil fruit. Yeah, he is. It has its own signature. Luffy said. Law sighed in relief, everything was going okay so far. Luffy was just happy that he had found out a few years back that he could somehow sense devil fruits. It made calming Law down a lot easier here. Sensing, more like seeing, Rosinante moving again, Luffy started speaking again. He's making his way back. Oh no. Luffy said, shocking Law. What happened? He asked, panicked. He tripped and fell off a bridge into a snowbank. He just got caught by some pirates. Phew, he's hurt, but he managed to get away. Luffy said, sighing in relief when he saw that Rosinante was making his way back to them. Minutes later Rosinante reached them, with a familiar heart-shaped strawberry in hand. What panicked the two boys though was the blood pouring from his wounds. Rosinante ignored their worries and shoved the fruit into Law's mouth, causing him to gag from the taste. It tastes horrible. Law said in a disgusted voice. Luffy and Rosinante rolled their eyes, despite the former still somewhat panicking. I could have told you that. They both said, having experience with devil fruits. Law then looked at himself and realized something in shock. Crap. Law shouted. What's wrong? Rosinante asked, thinking that maybe the fruit was a dud. I don't have anything to use to operate with. I need a knife or something. Law said. Suddenly though Luffy sensed a familiar presence on the island and pulled on both of their arms. Although they tried to ask why Luffy was dragging them he didn't answer. Not at least until they reached the beach where Luffy saw a man who had food stuck to his face. He quickly tackled the man. Uncle Virgo. You need to help Uncle Rosie. He was shot. Luffy shouted. Instantly the man moved to Rosinante's side and tucked in irritation when he realized the damage. What have you gotten yourself into, Corazon? I thought Doffy told you to stay put if it was too dangerous. Virgo said, stemming the blood loss by taking his jacket off and pressing it on the wounds. Luffy shook his head at that. Uncle Rosie was doing perfectly fine. But his clumsiness kicked in and he tripped off a bridge. Luffy said. That caused Virgo to sigh and facep him with his free hand. Law however was quick to say something. I can heal him if I can get a sharp object. Law said, causing Virgo to raise a brow. What do you mean? Did he actually get the fruit for you? Virgo asked. Law nodded before Luffy sensed other familiar presences on the island. He yanked on everybody's arms. Appa's here. He might have something. Luffy said. Virgo nodded and slung Rosinante over his back and followed Luffy, Law doing the same. About a few minutes later they reached the ship and Luffy saw his papa. Papa? We need something sharp. Luffy asked. What? Why? Doflamingo asked, confused. Then he saw Rosinante's condition and quickly acquiesced and had Baby 5 retrieve a sword. She ran over and handed the sword over to Luffy, who handed it over to Law. Law then had Virgo set Rosinante on the floor. He then pictured an operating room, gesturing with his left hand, and suddenly a blue sphere appeared around Rosinante. With another wave of his hand, Rosinante's body floated up a bit. He then took the sword and started using it in a surgical manner, cutting up Rosinante's body. At first everyone was shocked, thinking the boy had killed Rosinante, but they were surprised to see the man still breathing. Law then gestured with his left hand, causing the cut-up pieces that were the disconnected skin to reconnect and seal, and then put his body back together. When everyone looked at Rosinante's body, they saw that it was as if he was never wounded in the first place. Law vanished the sphere and sat on the ground, breathing hard. Now that Rosinante healed, you need to heal yourself. Doflamingo said. Law asked the man to give him a second so he could catch his breath, the action having drained him a bit. He then stood up a minute later and the blue sphere appeared around him. Using the sword, Law cut his body up and extracted a pure white liquid from his body, a giant ball of the liquid forming. Baby 5 was gaping at it in awe. That was in his body? That would kill anyone. She muttered, Buffalo nodding at that. Law then reconnected his body and dropped the sphere, the white liquid splattering on the snow, and then collapsed, unconscious. Senior Pink ran over to the boy and checked him before sighing. He's alright, he just passed out from exhaustion. He said, causing everyone else to sigh in relief. About a day later, both Rosinante and Law woke up to see Luffy staring at them. Luffy, seeing them awake, promptly cheered and shouted. Eyes. They're awake. Luffy shouted. Soon everyone was pouring into the medical bay on the ship and talking. Doflamingo quieted everyone before smiling at his brother-in-law. Well, you two, it looks like you're both going to live another day. You know what that means. Doflamingo said. Law smiled at that, knowing exactly what the man was talking about. You're going to train me to be the next Corazon? Law asked. Yup. Doflamingo said. A year went by after that event, with Law training even harder. Doflamingo by then had allowed Luffy to join in on some of the training. Also in that year they picked up 2 new people, Sugar, a 9-year-old girl, and her sister Monet, who was 17. Sugar and Luffy got on perfectly fine, and Monet spoiled Luffy as well, seeing him as another sibling to take care of. You could often see Sugar and Luffy playing together when Baby 5, Buffalo, and Law were on missions. However, one day when everyone was in the room, Rosinante stood up and did something that shocked everyone. He spoke. Doffy, on behalf of the entire world government, I am to offer you the position of Shichibukai. Rosinante said. Silverware clattered to the table as everyone looked at him in shock. Some of them looked as if Rosinante had betrayed them. Doflamingo, however, had a contemplative look on his face. So, this is what you were hiding? You're a marine, brother? Doflamingo asked. Rosinante sighed Ognad. Yes, after you killed your father, I ran away and was found by Fleet Admiral Sengoku. He took me in and raised me like his son. About a few months before I returned to you, he said he needed someone to spy on you, and I volunteered. Rosinante said. Luffy gave his papa a look of calm that caused Doffy to him. Did you ever intend on betraying me? Doflamingo asked, figuring that was the question his son had wanted him to ask. Rosinante vehemently shook his head no, which seemed to calm a lot of the officers. Not at all. Especially after I saw what Lu has done for you. Brother, you have to admit before you found Luffy you were, so to speak, a monster. A person who reveled in cruelty. Rosinante said. Doflamingo hammered again before speaking. I guess you have a point, brother. My son changed me for the better, and a lot of my anger, even my nightmares are gone because of him. So, the question is, are you leaving us if I accept? Doflamingo asked. Not at all, my orders are to stay with you if you accept, as a marine ambassador. I will answer both you and Sengoku. Rosinante said. Doflamingo tossed the idea of acceptance in his head for a while. To be honest, it would actually help a lot, especially if he wanted to take back his title as King of Dressrosa, as a pirate cannot hold a title of nobility. Especially a title that was associated with the 20 kingdoms. Suddenly he felt his son tugging on his feather mantle, causing him to look down. Accepted, Papa. It'd make our lives easier. Luffy said eagerly. Well, there was that too. It'd make it so that his son wouldn't be attacked by marines and executed if he took him on trips with him. And anything that benefited his son, benefited him. So with a smile he spoke. Alright then, brother, tell Fleet Admiral Sengoku I accept, and if you want, inform him of Virgo. Tell him, think of it as an employee exchange program. Doflamingo said, laughing at the end. Rosinante nodded and headed off and returned 30 minutes later. The next morning Baby 5 came running in with the morning edition of the newspaper. The headline of the newspaper was happily staring at them. The heavenly angel, Donquixote Doflamingo becomes a shichibukai. Now, Law was wondering exactly why Doflamingo's epithet was the heavenly angel when 3 years ago it was the heavenly demon. He voiced that question and it was Diamante who answered. He said that after getting Luffy and he became kinder, he started helping out the unfortunate at each island and making sure they were healthy. On top of that, he helped free enslaved people which in turn prompted the title Heavenly Angel. Luffy however was wanting to ask his papa a question. "Yes, Lu?" he asked. Luffy smiled at his papa. "Now that we can go anywhere, can we go on vacation?" Luffy asked. "Vacation? Where would you want to go?" Doflamingo asked. Luffy ran to his room and came out with a book. He quickly opened it and showed the page to everyone. "I want to go to the Goa Kingdom," Luffy said. "Oh? Goa Kingdom? Why? You want to see the city?" Pika asked in his weird voice. Luffy shook his head and turned the page to show the mountain by the kingdom. "I want to go there. They say that the animals here are the strongest of all the blues. Think of the training," Luffy said eagerly. Everyone laughed at that. Trust Luffy to want to turn a vacation into a training trip. Doflamingo thought about it. He was still building his power base for when he returned to Dressrosa to ask for the throne back, so a vacation in East Blue, the weakest of the 4 blues, didn't sound bad at all. "Alright then, pack your bags guys, I guess we're heading to Dawn Island," Doflamingo said, causing everyone to cheer. They didn't actually leave for Goa Kingdom for 3 months. This was to get everything set up for the trip. One of the things was seeing if they could acquire a Seastone-lined ship for transport to East Blue. Rosinante made sure that it was possible by asking Sengoku who willingly allowed it. The other thing was that they were waiting on 2 devil fruits they had found that had arrived. These 2 devil fruits were wanted by Monet and Sugar, although they had to have a talk with Sugar about her fruit. The reason being for this was that Sugar's fruit, the Hobi Hobi no Mi, had 2 downsides to it. First, she was warned to make sure she got control of her powers before she touched anybody. When a person with the fruit turned somebody into a toy, it erased all memories other people had of the person. They warned her about this lest she accidentally use it on one of them. The other downside, or plus in some people's cases, was that it permanently halted the aging of the user. So, Sugar would be stuck at 10 unless she ran into someone who had a devil fruit that could manipulate age. Sugar accepted this and ate the fruit before going into full training mode. Monet got a Loja-type fruit, the Yuki Yuki no Mi, or the Snow fruit. It allowed her to manipulate snow into it at will, as the name said. The 3 months they were all packed and on the ship chartered to take them to East Blue. It took them a few weeks, but they finally managed to make it there. Of course, Luffy was at the front of the ship staring in awe. The Marines manning the ship thought the boy was in awe because of the kingdom, that is until they heard him speak. "Look papa. Look at the mountain. That's where all the cool animals are," Luffy said, causing his papa to chuckle. "Let's get to the hotel first then you can go exploring," Doflamingo said, ruffling his child's hair. Many would wonder why it sounded as if Doflamingo wasn't going to send anybody with his kid. Well, that's because he wasn't. He was confident enough in his son to be able to take care of the animals here. He was also confident that even if there came an animal his son couldn't take care of, he'd know to run. Soon enough the boat reached the dock and everyone got off, helping carry everything to the hotel in High Town. Doflamingo really didn't want to get a hotel in the nobles' town, but the nobles in the town insisted, probably wanting to get friendly with an ex-celestial dragon turned Shichibukai. When they got to the hotel they all saw Luffy off, who put his adorable little red feather mantle to match his father, as well as red sunglasses like his papa's, and grabbed his steel box staff. He hadn't really gotten a handle on any specific weapon, so they stuck with a bow staff for now. Ignoring all the nobles looking his way, Luffy made his way to where his papa had said the entrance to Great Terminal was. When he got there, he was stopped by the guards. "Who are you little kid and why are you heading to a trash heap like Great Terminal?" one of the guards asked. Luffy scowled at them. "I'm Donquixote D. Luffy. My papa said I can go play on the mountain and this is the fastest way to Mount Columbo," Luffy said. The guards backed up a bit when they heard that. "Donquixote? Could he be the son of the new Shichibukai?" the other guard asked his partner. "Yup. That's my papa," Luffy said cheerfully. The guards then gave him a questioning look. "Why would you want to go play on the mountain? There's bandits there and dangerous animals," the guard said. Luffy pouted. "How else am I going to play? It sounds like fun," Luffy said. With a sigh the guard shrugged before opening the gate and letting him through. With a cheer Luffy charged into Great Terminal. Weaving his way through the junk he quickly made his way to the edge of the Great Terminal and the start of the hike up the mountain. This was going to be fun. Elsewhere there were 2 boys running through the forest. One of them had messy black hair, gray eyes, and was wearing an orange sleeveless shirt and brown cargo shirts. The other was blonde-haired with blue eyes and missing a tooth. He was wearing a black top hat adorned with blue goggles and wearing a fancy blue outfit. These two kids were Portas D. Ace and Sabo, boys who were friends and looking to become pirates. Ace lived with the bandits on Mount Colombo, while Sabo lived in Grey Terminal, having run away from his family. Suddenly Ace stopped as his stomach growled. "Sabo. I'm hungry, let's catch some food," Ace said eagerly. Sabo rolled his eyes as if this was an everyday occurrence. That, however, was because it was an everyday occurrence. How his friend could eat so much would always elude him. "Alright, but no crocodiles. Every time we catch one you don't leave any meat for me," Sabo said with a look. Ace gave a huff. "It's not my fault you're too slow." "Fine, we'll catch a tiger," Ace said before they headed off. As they got further in the forest they heard the sounds of fighting. That caused them to pause and make their way to the location. What met their eyes shocked them, big time. Right in front of them was a boy that wore a red feather mantle and red sunglasses with no shirt and just shorts that had to be younger than them. That wasn't what shocked them was the fact that he was fighting evenly with a gigantic tiger that the boys recognized as the Beast King, the boss of Mount Colombo. The boy charged at the Beast King with a metal box staff that suddenly turned black. When the staff slammed into the tiger went flying and careened through a couple of trees. Seconds later the tiger tackled the boy, which made Sabo move to run forward. However, he was stopped by Ace. "He's going to get killed," Sabo whispered furiously. Ace scoffed at that. "If he's dumb enough to attack the Beast King then he deserves to die," Ace said. It was times like this that Sabo really disliked his friend's darkness in him. However, they were quickly distracted when the tiger was sent flying again and it slumped to the floor, panting in exertion. The kid then darted at the tiger and jumped in the air. "Buzo. Sky Slam," the boy shouted, his staff going black before he slammed it onto the tiger. The two boys heard a sickening crack as the tiger suddenly stopped moving. "Is it dead?" Ace whispered in shock. The boy cheered and sat on the back of the tiger. "That was fun. Hey, you two can come out now," the boy shouted. Instantly the boys flinched, seeing that they had been noticed. It confused them because they were very well hidden. But nevertheless, they walked forward, their weapons out. "Hiya there. I'm Luffy. Donquixote Luffy," Luffy said cheerfully. Ace scoffed, but Sabo had shock on his face. "So? I care why?" Ace asked. Sabo turned and started shaking Ace violently. "Do you know who he's the son of?" Sabo shouted. Ace pushed Sabo back before righting himself. He then raised a brow at his friend. "What? Is he the son of some noble?" Ace asked. Sabo shook his head violently. "No. He's the son of the newest Shichibukai and former celestial dragon, Donquixote Doflamingo, captain of the Donquixote pirates," Sabo said. Ace was a bit shocked at that because that meant the boy was the son of a pirate. Which meant that the boy could have stories about pirate adventures. And despite Ace's hatred for the world, he could be bribed with stories, especially about pirates that were not his father. However, he had a question for Sabo. "How the hell do you know that?" Ace asked. Sabo glared at the boy because he knew very well how he knew that. "I read the newspaper, remember? You always said that it was useless, but looks like the information came in handy," Sabo said. Ace chuckled sheepishly at that. He had definitely said something along those lines. What? So he thought reading the news was useless. Well, it was useless to him until he became a pirate so he could read about his bounty. He then turned to the boy who was looking at them funny. "So you're the son of the pirate?" Ace asked. "Shishishi. You guys are funny. But yeah, that's my papa. He's amazing," Luffy said eagerly. Sabo however had a different question for Luffy. "Why is your papa a former celestial dragon? I thought they kept their title forever," Sabo asked. Luffy's face crunched up in concentration as he tried to remember the explanation his papa and uncle had given him. According to Papa, Grandpapa was a really kind man and wanted to live like everyone else. So he let go of his title. But things got bad because people really don't like celestial dragons," Luffy said somberly. Sabo and Ace winced at that. Sabo could only imagine how normal people would treat a former celestial dragon. "What happened?" Ace asked, causing Sabo to slap him for the rude question. Ace and Sabo started bickering until Luffy actually answered the question. According to Papa, Grandma got sick and the other people refused to help her. They also would attack Papa and Uncle every day until one day Grandma died. Papa kinda lost it and blamed Grandpapa and killed him. He thought that if he brought his papa's body back to the celestial dragons, they'd accept him back but they didn't," Luffy said. Sabo and Ace really grimaced at that. At first it sounded like his papa was a bad guy, but from the sound of it, at least what Sabo thought was that Doflamingo suffered a psychotic break. They however quickly realized that Luffy was still speaking. Papa was in a dark place for a long time, that is until he found me. He said that he changed after he found me and became a lot nicer and happier. He says I'm the light in his darkness," Luffy said. "Found him? That made him sound like he wasn't biologically Doflamingo's son. Ace voiced that much, curious about the boy's real parents. "Ah, yeah, Papa said he found me in a shipwreck on the beach. But I don't care if Papa's not my real papa. Blood doesn't always make a family. Some of the best families are people you form bonds with," Luffy said eagerly. Suddenly Ace froze at that statement. Sabo noticed this and inwardly sighed. He agreed with Luffy, and to be completely honest, Sabo felt that Ace needed to hear someone other than him say it. In Ace's mind, he was running through those words in his mind. He wasn't expecting somebody else to say that at all. Automatically, without his brain filtering it, he asked a question. "Do you believe the sins of the father fall to the son?" Ace asked. This time Sabo froze. He actually didn't expect Ace to trust this new boy this far. He quickly however smiled because he knew that it meant that Ace was making progress. However, he really hoped that this Luffy boy was going to say the right thing. His hope started failing when he saw Luffy's face scrunch up. Of course not. That'd be weird. "I mean, you don't inherit your parents' debts, so why should you inherit your parents' sins?" Luffy asked confusedly. That hope came rushing back like that avalanche that one year on Mount Columbo that he almost got buried under. He saw Ace tentatively walking towards the boy, as if expecting him to disappear. What Ace said next shocked Sabo, for he didn't expect Ace to trust this fast, as it was severely out of character for the boy. "What would you say if Goldie Roger had a child?" Ace asked, steeling himself for disappointment. Luffy however just had a confused look on his face. "I'd say hello. I mean, that's what Uncle Rosie says that you're supposed to say when you introduce yourself to people." "Is this a trick question?" Luffy asked, clearly very confused. All the work he did bracing himself for disappointment shattered under those words. The boy wouldn't hate him. The boy wouldn't hate him at all. Instantly Ace charged at the boy and tackled him to the floor. Sabo was about to stop Ace, thinking he was attacking the boy. That was until he heard sobbing coming from Ace. Ace was crying. That was an odd occurrence for Sabo because he had never heard Ace cry before. Luffy just hugged the boy, rubbing his back in circles, doing what his papa did when he cried. After the sobs subsided, Luffy decided to ask the boy a question. "Hey, do you two want to be friends?" he asked. Ace looked up with red eyes and smiled at the boy. Sabo, back by the trees, was doing the same. Thus began the friendship between the three boys. Every morning, Luffy would make his way to Mount Columbo to hunt and play pirate with Ace and Sabo. On top of that, Ace and Sabo would ask about life as a son of a pirate. He'd wow them with his stories, one of their favorites being how Law got cured. Of course, his papa would also ask where he was going, and he just said he was going to play with two new friends. One morning they were talking about the Go Kingdom. "I've always wondered what High Town looked like," Ace mumbled as they laid on the grass next to a fire with a giant haunch of meat roasting on it. Sabo and Luffy grimaced at that for different reasons. But it was Luffy who spoke up. "It's not that nice. The people there are mean, except for Sari," Luffy said. Ace and Sabo perked up at the mention of a name. "Sari?" Ace asked, having never heard Luffy mention that name. Sabo slightly recognized the name, but it couldn't possibly be her. He had never met the girl, but he was sure that it couldn't be her because someone with a father like that to raise her, she couldn't be nice. She's younger than Tora, but older than you guys, I think. She has a pointy nose and blonde hair, and she doesn't like her father," Luffy said. Sabo paused at that. The more that Luffy talked about this girl, the more it sounded like the girl he heard of. "So," he asked Luffy a question. "Luffy, what's her full name?" Sabo asked. I think it's Sari Nantaka something," Luffy said, not really able to pronounce the full name. "Is it Sari Nantakinet?" Sabo asked. Luffy nodded cheerfully. "Do you know the name Sabo?" Ace asked questioningly. Sabo nodded hesitantly as he answered. "She's the daughter and only child of the current king of Go Kingdom," Sabo said. Luffy oohed at that, but Ace had a confused look on his face. "How can you know that if you've never been to High Town?" Ace asked. Sabo looked away in shame, a blush showing on his cheeks. Luffy nudged Sabo and smiled at him, causing the boy's body to relax. Sabo then let out a sigh before speaking. "I'd like to say that I'm an ex-noble. I ran away from my parents when I was 5. Sabo said. Ace and Luffy looked at Sabo, expecting something more. When Sabo didn't say anything else, Ace facepumped. "You think I care about that? I already knew about that. Where the hell would someone who lives in Grey Terminal get what you wear and your crystal lens goggles?" Ace said. Sabo blushed at that as Ace did have a point. The clothing he wore could never be afforded by someone in Grey Terminal. "But why are you surprised that I knew about Sari?" Sabo asked. This time it was Ace's turn to blush. "Well, I thought that you were the son of a noble from outside of Go Kingdom." Ace stuttered out. Luffy giggled at that before he had an idea. "Hey. Do you guys want to meet Sari and my papa?" Luffy asked. Sabo started panicking at that. "I can't. My father might recognize me," Sabo shouted. Luffy shook his head at that, as he had a solution for that. Auntie Jorah can help. Luffy said, confusing the other two. How can your aunt help? Ace asked. Shishishi. Auntie Jorah ate the 8080 no me. She can change how anyone looks by thinking of it. Normally she uses it for her own style of art, but she can do realistic paintings pretty well. Luffy said. Ace and Sabo were in awe, having never really heard of devil fruits before. Of course, Luffy had mentioned them around their third meeting, but never really went in depth. So, it was always cool when Luffy talked about them. I mean, if she can change how I look, then sure. Sabo said eagerly. He really wanted to meet Luffy's papa, and if it worked, it'd be very helpful with some of their escapades to get more money for their pirate fund. So, it was the next morning that Luffy arrived with a tall woman with an hergless figure and mismatched hair. Oh? So these are your new friends, little master? They're so cute. Jorah said sweetly. Both boys blushed at that while Luffy giggled at them. Jorah then approached Sabo and hummed. So, what would you like to change? Jorah said, pulling canvas and painting supplies out of the bag she had on her back. Sabo thought about it for a few minutes before he answered. Well, he'd notice my attire and my hair and everything else I can keep the same. Sabo said. Jorah then started to mix paints as she started to paint something, using Sabo as the base. About 30 minutes later, she was done and showed the boys. The painting was a very realistic and three-dimension-like painting of a boy of similar height and structure to Sabo. The difference was that the boy wore a black fedora with a blue feather in its cap, had messy brown hair, and was wearing what looked like an archaeologist outfit, complete with brown boots. That's good for you, dear? She asked. Sabo nodded in awe, loving the painting. Jorah then began to think of how it'd look in 3 dimensions, a thought bubble of the look appearing above her head. She then grabbed the thought bubble and tossed it at Sabo. A puff of smoke surrounded Sabo before it cleared, revealing him now looking just like the 3-dimensional art she had in mind. Both boys oohed and awed at it before cheering. Now we can go into High Town. Sabo said happily, Ace nodding as well. The four headed back to Goa Kingdom where Luffy and Jorah led them into High Town to where Luffy and his family were staying. When they reached the door that led to their fancy room, Jorah knocked on it before it opened up, revealing Sugar. Oh hey. It's Jorah and Luffy. Sugar shouted. Jorah and Luffy led them into the room where Ace and Sabo saw a lot of people sitting at a table that had to have been moved into the room because it clashed with the color theme intended for the room. Hey son. Are those your friends you've been talking about? Doflamingo said from his seat at the head of the table, going through some documents. Luffy nodded eagerly, pushing Sabo and Ace forward. The two boys suddenly looked really shy and nervous, being in front of a famous pirate captain. The black-haired one is Ace. And the one wearing Auntie Jorah's art as a disguise is Sabo. Luffy said. Everyone waved at them before getting back to work. Doflamingo tossed a smile towards his son before speaking. Hey, little one, I may have gotten a lead on that fruit you wanted. He said, causing Luffy to cheer. Ace and Sabo looked at Luffy oddly before the boy said it was a surprise. He then told his family he was going to head off to see Sari. Dragging Ace and Sabo with him, he led them out of the hotel and into one of the few alleys in High Town. Sneaking through the alley, he reached a wall and knocked on one of the bricks in a pattern, the object making a hollow knocking sound. Seconds later, Luffy had them step back and a portion of the wall slid back, revealing a secret room and the blonde-haired girl Luffy talked about as well as 4 other kids. The 4 other kids were 2 girls and 2 boys, the 2 girls both having long red hair and matching golden brown eyes. The 2 boys were different looking though, one having black hair and blue eyes and the other having dark blue hair and dark green eyes. Oh. It's you, Luffy. Who are these 2 boys? Sari asked, letting them in. These are the 2 boys I told you I made friends with, Ace and Sabo. Luffy said. Ace looked a bit nervous at the extra people, remembering Luffy having said he'd show them Sari, but not the others. Who are these other kids, Luffy? Ace asked. Oh. The 2 girls are the twins, Isa and Mashi. The 2 boys are Haruin and Yasashi, Hai and Yasa for short. They're noble kids just like Sari who don't want to be cruel like their parents. They want to change their kingdom for the better. Luffy said, the kids nodding. Sabo was in awe at this. He never knew there were other kids like him. He turned to Luffy to ask him a question. How do I get rid of this disguise? He asked. Sari, you still got a bottle of seawater? Luffy asked, remembering the girl had recently gotten some to experiment with in a dish. The girl nodded and handed a bottle over to Luffy. Luffy uncapped it and dumped the contents onto Sabo. The effects were rather instant as the disguise dripped off of Sabo, as if it was just painted on him. Sari, however, seemed to recognize Sabo rather instantly. Hey. Your outlook, son, the boy I was set up to marry. I heard you ran away. She said. Sabo blushed at that, having not realized that his father had meant it literally when he wanted him to marry up. I did, I couldn't take it anymore. Sabo said, looking down. Sari just tilted Sabo's chin up to show him the other noble kids were nodding and understanding. We had thought about running away long ago, but Sari here convinced us otherwise. Isa said, Mashi nodding. Yeah, she convinced all of us to stay. Yasa said. Sabo had a confused look on his face. If you don't like it here then why are you all staying? Sabo asked. Sari smiled at him before gesturing over to their large table that Ace and Sabo just noticed being there. On it were piles of papers with different things written all over them. As Sabo examined some of them he noticed a lot were law changes and other suggestions. One of them was in fact a suggestion to get rid of Grey Terminal and instead build a waste processing plant that recycled waste and funneled it back into the economy. We're planning to change Goa Kingdom when we get old enough to take over. Thankfully to become queen I don't exactly need to be married. Luffy's papa's helping us get everything in order. Sari said. Sabo was in awe about it all. These kids took their horrible situation and used it to their advantage. All the while he ran from his situation and made nothing of it. Luffy sensed his shame and hugged Sabo, causing the boy to look at Luffy and smile sadly. Don't think about dark things, Sabo. You wanted freedom, isn't that what you told me? Luffy said. What? How did you know what I was thinking? Sabo asked, confused. Sari giggled at them before speaking. Luffy didn't tell you about his ability to sense emotions? She asked. Both boys turned to Luffy who blushed and sheepishly looked at the ground. There wasn't any time I could really mention it. Luffy said. Ace decided to step in and save Luffy from his embarrassment. Well, it's not like you could have brought it up in any of the conversations we had. Is that how you sensed us when we first met? Ace asked. Sabo was gaping at Ace in comical shock. Ace you can think, Sabo said, causing everybody to laugh at the boy. Ace blushed and hit Sabo on the head, causing him to tumble onto the ground. Yes, I can think, damn it. I just prefer leaving it to you, you plan better. Ace said. Deciding to change the conversation, Sabo asked Sari a question. So, how did Luffy tell you exactly? Sabo asked. Suddenly Sari blushed and the other kids laughed at her. Mashi decided to take this one. So, picture this. Sari here's trying to sneak around and inwardly is panicking because she thought her father had seen her sneak out. Mashi started. Then comes Luffy who has been tracking her, curious about who was panicking in this fog of arrogance, his words, not ours. Lo and behold he follows her to the secret hideout and scares the living daylights out of her. Isa said, continuing. Yasa picked up here with a chuckle. While Sari is trying to recover from having a heart attack, I asked him how he found this place, and he just said I followed Blondie's panicked emotions. Ooh, this is a cool place. Yasa said. Long story short, after that we reluctantly explained what the place was and he introduced us to his father. Doflamingo offers to help us, stating how he hates noble arrogance as well, and here we are. Hi said. Sari then recovered and gestured to their entire hideout, which caused the two boys to actually look at it. It was actually pretty high-tech. It had the latest kind of den mushi that allowed them to tap into other people's conversations, as well as call any den mushi. On a table against the wall were several surveillance den mushi, as well as several camera den mushi. Doflamingo actually funded a lot of it. With his help, we've been able to secretly help out the people in Grey Terminal, as well as ease the crime rates from Edge Town and Grey Terminal. Sari said. Ace was a bit suspicious of the entire thing. Mostly because nobody helped people for nothing, he had plenty of experience with that. What does Doflamingo get out of it? Ace asked. Luffy spoke up with a cheerful tone. Appa gets to see the faces of the nobles when Sari becomes queen and changes everything. Also, this was Sari's idea. When Papa becomes king of Dressrosa again she's pledged to instigate a trade agreement between the two kingdoms. Luffy said. Normally Luffy wouldn't know this stuff, but his papa had argued that as his son he would become king when he stepped down, and Luffy needed to know this stuff for when that happened. So, Luffy reluctantly learned all about politics and running a business. Luffy had argued about the last one, but his papa in turn argued that it'd help with trading, so Luffy learned it anyways. King of Dressrosa? Sabo asked curiously. Luffy nodded eagerly at that. Appa's family, before they became celestial dragons, were the royal family of Dressrosa. In a few years he's going to ask the king of Dressrosa to return the title to him. Luffy said. Ace and Sabo were confused about that, not knowing about the political climate of Dressrosa. Seeing this confusion and guessing what they were confused about, Sari answered. The reason the king's hand it back is because none of his children wished to take the throne, so he has no heirs. Also, the Riku family has always in a way disliked being royalty, but they were the trusted family of the Donquixote family. Sari said, remembering her royal history lessons. Ace and Sabo nodded before Luffy asked them a question. So do you want to join us? Luffy asked. With a brief look at each other they then turned to face the others and spoke two words together. Of course. They said, and thus started Sabo and Ace entrance into the Underground Nobles Association for Equality of Dawn Island, or Janiti for short. The name was Luffy's idea because every cool group needs a name. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. And also check out the playlist that I have created and enjoy. Link is in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.